Hey everyone. On the story for today. I accidentally spilled wine on my sister-in-law's dress. She slapped me, so I slapped her back. Now I'm kicked out and told to apologize. Last week, I went to my mother-in-law's house for a family dinner. It was supposed to be a nice evening planned for all of us to catch up and spend some quality time together as a family. Both my husband, Ray, and I were looking forward to it. Once we got there, the atmosphere was warm and cheerful, with everyone chatting, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. After dinner, things turned even livelier. The adults in the group started drinking, unwinding, and enjoying themselves. As the night progressed, my mother-in-law was the perfect host, refilling our wine glasses and keeping the mood upbeat. At one point, the music came on, and the adults who felt like it began to dance. My husband and I also joined in. Caught up in the fun of the evening, I didn't realize that my sister-in-law was standing right behind me. I was swaying to the music, and at one point, I accidentally bumped into her. This caused my wine glass to tip over, and before I could react, the wine spilled all over her dress. It was a complete accident. My sister-in-law gasped in horror, and I did too. She was wearing a white dress, and now it was completely drenched with deep red wine. My heart sank as guilt flooded over me. I immediately started apologizing profusely, explaining that it was an accident, but I could see that she was livid. My husband, Ray, quickly grabbed some napkins and brought them over so his sister could try to dab away the wine. I was still apologizing, trying to help clean the mess, when she began yelling at me, her frustration spilling out in angry accusations. "Are you blind?" she snapped. "Can't you see what's happening around you? How dare you spill your wine over me?" Her words hit like daggers, and I could feel the tension building. I kept apologizing, over and over, desperate to make amends while she kept reprimanding me, calling me careless and stupid for ruining her dress. Then, in a moment of tipsy humor, I finally replied, "I am really sorry, but I don't have eyes on the back of my head. How am I supposed to know you'd be lurking right behind me like a ninja?" My husband, Ray, let out a laugh at my remark as we continued to help clean her up. My words were meant to lighten the mood, but instead, it had the opposite effect. My sister-in-law stiffened visibly, her eyes narrowing as she stared at me with a look of cold fury. The next moment, before I could process what was happening, she slapped me hard across my face. The sound of the slap echoed in the room, and I felt the sting of her hand burning into my cheek. Shocked, I froze, my face now hot with both pain and embarrassment. The entire room fell silent. All the laughter and music came to an abrupt halt as everyone turned to look at us. My sister-in-law, still seething, screamed, "How dare you talk back to me? I can stand wherever I want. You should have been more careful. I can't believe that you just ruined my dress with your clumsiness. Do you even know how expensive this dress is? Do you even know the brand I'm wearing? You can't even afford this, so how dare you try to argue with me?" I was mortified, standing there with all eyes on us. My husband, Ray, didn't say a word. He just stood there, silently watching as his sister berated me in front of everyone. At this point, my mother-in-law and father-in-law quickly stepped in to try to calm my sister-in-law down. My mother-in-law gently tried to soothe her and take her away so that she wouldn't cause a scene further. But my sister-in-law was having none of it. Her voice rose again, louder and more piercing. "This was my favorite dress," she cried, practically shaking with anger. "It's completely ruined because of her. Do you see this stain? It's not going to come out." She whipped her head back to glare at me angrily. "You're going to replace it, and I'll make sure you pay every single cent of what it costs." Her tone turned even more cutting as she added, "Though I doubt you'll even be able to afford it with your pathetic salary." She spat out the last words like they left a bitter taste in her mouth. Her insinuation stung, and the humiliation I'd been feeling deepened. For some context, my sister-in-law married into wealth not long after graduating college. Her husband, significantly older than her, is 13 years her senior and about 9 years older than Ray and me. He's an established professional from a wealthy family, which puts her in a very financially comfortable position. She's getting married, she has lived a life of luxury and thinks the rest of us are poor. What makes it all the more ironic is her self-proclaimed identity as a tradwife. Yes, you heard that right, she describes herself as a traditional wife unlike the rest of us. She dedicates much of her time to making TikToks about how her purpose in life is to serve her husband and prepare herself to be a fit mother for their children one day. To her, being a trad wife is a badge of honor, and she wears it proudly. but she views the rest of the world and other people through a lens of privilege and entitlement. My sister-in-law's husband, being the wealthy man that he is, has always given her everything she wants in life. Hence, I completely understand that her dress must have been really expensive. Honestly, I felt terrible about spilling wine on it. Really did. I know I should have been more careful. But despite my regret and my repeated apologies, I couldn't help but wonder, did my mistake truly warrant her reaction? Did it justify her slapping me across the face, humiliating me in front of everyone, screaming at me, and insinuating that I was poor? Even though I wasn't as rich as her husband, I still earned quite well for my age and didn't mind paying her back. I tried telling her this, but she continued her tirade and my blood pressure felt like it was steadily climbing with each cruel word she spat at me. Her shrill voice was grating against my nerves. She was close to my face, jabbing me with her fingers while hurling insults at me. What really struck me was how she looked at that moment, a grown woman throwing what could only be described as a tantrum. Her behavior was so over the top it bordered on childish, and I found myself stunned by how entitled she seemed. I didn't realize it at first, but as her yelling and accusations escalated, something inside me snapped. I felt my hand move before my brain could catch up. I slapped her back. Hard. So hard that it completely silenced her. The room, which had been filled with her shrieking moments before, went dead silent. Everyone froze, including me. Her cheeks flushed deep red. I then looked her dead in the eye and told her firmly, "Can you just stop yelling for a moment so I can talk? I am going to replace your dress, so stop screaming about how I can't afford this. You've never had to spend a dime without someone else footing the bills, so who are you to call me poor?" My voice was steady, as I watched Sil process what I had just told her. She looked pissed, but before we could argue further, my mother-in-law pushed me away from Sil. "Get away from her," she screamed, as she then started to check on Sil's face. My husband, who had remained silent throughout my sister-in-law's earlier tantrum, now joined his mother in fretting over his sister. Both of them were suddenly full of concern for her, as she began to cry loudly, wailing about how disrespectful I was and how she had never been slapped by anyone before. My father-in-law, visibly alarmed, ran to fetch some eyes for her face as though I had done irreparable damage to his daughter. The way they were reacting was almost surreal. It was as if my sister-in-law had been shot or seriously injured. The melodrama of it all was overwhelming. My husband, Ray, suddenly turned on me. His voice was loud, sharp, and full of anger. "You had no right to slap my sister," he yelled. "This is all your fault anyway. The only thing you had to do was apologize and keep your mouth shut." Trying to defend myself, I said, "We were both dancing. Your sister came up from behind me, I didn't see her. Spilling my wine on her dress was an accident." I apologized over and over. But what justified her slapping me in the first place? My voice was trembling, a mix of anger and hurt, but I was determined to make my point. Before Ray could respond, my sister-in-law erupted again. "How dare you slap me? Do you even know who you're dealing with?" She screamed, her voice shrill with rage. "I'm going to sue you for assault. You'll pay for this, mark my words." She then turned on Ray, yelling at him too. "Shame on you. How can you not control your woman? She has no right to say anything to me after what she did." Her words were dripping with entitlement and superiority. Without waiting for anyone's response, she then stormed off to the washroom to change, my mother-in-law hot on her heels to comfort her. I was still standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by everyone who was murmuring and clearly talking about me. Somehow they saw me as the villain in this situation. That's when Ray turned back to me, frustrated and disappointed. "You need to go home," he said firmly. His words stunned me. "What?" I asked, still trying to process what he was saying. I could barely believe my own husband was telling me to leave, and in front of everyone. "You've done enough," he continued. "You've made a scene, and my sister needs to calm down. She can't do that with you still here." His tone was firm, and it left no room for argument. He added, "You shouldn't have slapped her back. In fact, you shouldn't have done anything to her, no matter what she did to you. You are older than her, so you should act more maturely. She didn't mean it when she slapped you, but you made things worse by slapping her back. You just escalated the situation unnecessarily." My father-in-law chimed in, nodding in agreement with Ray. "It's best if you leave," he ordered. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. My face burned with humiliation as I realized what was happening. I was being kicked out of the house not just by my in-laws, but also by my own husband. I couldn't believe he had chosen his sister's side so completely, without even caring how unfairly I had been treated. Too upset to argue, I grabbed my things, quickly booked an Uber, and left. On the way back home, my mind was racing as I kept thinking things over and over again. What had I done so wrong to deserve being kicked out of a party? All I did was defend myself after being humiliated, slapped, and insulted. Was it really so unforgivable? And why hadn't my husband, Ray, taken a stand for me? I mean, I did kind of know that for my husband, his baby sister always came first. For example, when I first met his family, it was a casual lunch, and I remember being nervous yet hopeful. But throughout the meal, Sil had spent all her time and energy grilling me about every detail of my life, my upbringing, my education, and even my job. It felt less like a polite conversation and more like an interrogation. I remember being taken aback by her nosiness. To be clear, both Ray's family and mine come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, and I was already working in IT, a field that paid me significantly more than Ray earned in advertising. Yet despite all this, she acted as though I wasn't good enough for her brother. At one point, she even said outright that Ray was such a catch and needed to be careful about getting serious with just anyone. And where was Ray during all of this? Sitting silently, of course. Not once did he speak up to defend me. He just let his sister's words hang in the air, unchallenged, as though it wasn't his place to intervene. His silence hurt more than her words ever could. It was as though he had silently agreed that this was her right to interrogate and judge me while they looked on. After that lunch, when we were alone, I told Ray how upset I was. I explained that it wasn't fair for his sister to treat me that way and, more importantly, that he should have stood up for me. To his credit, he apologized back then. He told me he hadn't even realized how her behavior came across and excused it as her just being protective about him. He promised that next time, he would take a stand for me. But as the years passed, time and again, his sister would insult me, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly, and Ray would either ignore it or act like it wasn't happening. When I brought it up, he'd brush it off, saying I was overreacting or reading too much into things. I had also let things slide since I didn't want to cause tension between him and his family. However, this was different. After reaching home, I kept waiting for my husband, Ray, to come back so we could talk, even argue if needed, anything to address the chaos of the night. But he never came. Instead, late into the night, I received a voice note from him. He told me that his sister was still upset and that he, along with his mother and father, was going to take care of her. As if that weren't enough of a blow, he went on to say that most of his family believed I was in the wrong and that if his sister went through with her threats to sue me for assault and emotional distress, he would have no choice but to support her since she is his family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had he refused to come home and check on me, but he was also openly siding with his sister against his own wife. He didn't stop there though. He told me that I needed to offer his sister a heartfelt apology, one that would pacify her enough to dissuade her from following through on her legal threats. Now I know a lot of people in my position might have given in. They might have apologized, swallowed their pride, and admitted to something they didn't truly believe, all for the sake of keeping the peace or avoiding further conflict. But I couldn't. I knew deep in my heart that I had done nothing wrong. Yes, the wine spill had been an accident, but I had apologized repeatedly. The slap I gave Sil wasn't unprovoked. It was a reaction to being humiliated, insulted, and physically assaulted in front of everyone. If anyone should have been apologizing, it was her. She had slapped me first. She had escalated the situation with her entitled, cruel behavior. I knew that if she went ahead with a lawsuit, she wouldn't have a strong case. Her claims of emotional distress were laughable at best, given the circumstances. It was obvious that her threats were nothing more than a power play, a way to force me into groveling for her forgiveness so she could soothe her wounded ego. But what hurt the most wasn't Sil's actions, it was Ray's. Throughout this entire ordeal, he had shown where his loyalty truly lay, with his family, not with me. The fact that he could so easily take her side, even after everything I had endured, spoke volumes. He hadn't even once asked if I was okay. He hadn't checked on me or offered any comfort. Instead, he had spent the night blaming me for everything, as though I were the sole cause of all the chaos. So, the next morning, when I woke up and my husband was still not home, I decided to pack my bags and leave the house. No notes, no explanations. By the time Ray finally came back home and discovered I was gone, I imagine he must have been surprised because my phone started ringing with his calls. I picked up, and he demanded to know where I was. There was no concern in his voice, no hint of worry or sadness. He was just angry. He shouted about how he hadn't expected to come home to an empty house and was furious that I had left with all my things. Then, as if to justify his anger, he proudly announced that he had worked so hard to convince his sister to come back with him to our place. His grand plan was for her to receive a face-to-face apology from me so that the entire situation could be resolved. I couldn't help but scoff. Staying calm, I told him that I was headed to my parents' place and made it clear that I had no intention of returning anytime soon, as I had a lot to think about. I also told him, very plainly, that I would not be apologizing to his sister for something that wasn't my fault. However, I added that if his sister wanted to apologize to me for her behavior, I would be more than willing to listen. This, of course, didn't sit well with him. He argued that as his wife, I couldn't just up and leave like that. He called me rude and inconsiderate. Then, he demanded that I come back home immediately, but I stood my ground. I also let him know that if his sister wanted to go ahead with her empty threats to sue me, she was more than welcome to try. I assured him I'd hire my own lawyer and fight her in court if necessary. At this point, Ray completely lost it. He called me several choice words so ugly and hurtful that I don't even want to repeat them here. So, currently I am at my parents' place. I have told my parents what happened to me. My dad is completely on my side and has even scolded Ray for not standing up for me. However, my mom believes that I should have not left my husband's side without talking to him first, and that communication is the key to resolve our issues. Today, I looked up the price of the dress online and sent my Sil the money. Hopefully, this will put an end to her complaints about it. I know many of you didn't want me to pay her back, but I don't want to owe her anything. I did ruin her dress, and I always intended to make it right. Also, I would like to clarify a few things since they keep coming up in the comments. First of all, as a woman, I know when another woman is deliberately trying to get under my skin. My Sil has always had this inexplicable need to compete with me from the very beginning, even though I have never seen her as a competition. It's clear that she is jealous of me for something, though exactly what I cannot pinpoint. But if I had to guess, it might be the fact that I've built a successful life and career for myself. Unlike her, I didn't marry a wealthy man to afford nice things or a comfortable lifestyle. All my life, I have worked hard to achieve everything I have, and I guess this financial independence I have is something she resents. My Sil married rich and seems to rely entirely on her husband for the life she leads. Although her husband does provide her with everything, he is also somewhat controlling since he is much older than her. She has complained to us in the past about how she is not allowed to go out with her friends much, or wear certain clothes that he doesn't like. However, I have no sympathy for her. This is the life she has chosen for herself. She enjoys showing off her luxurious lifestyle, constantly reminding everyone how privileged she is. She boasts about her vacations to exotic locations, the designer clothes and handbags she buys, or how she doesn't have to worry about work because her husband takes care of everything. She spends all day lounging by the pool, getting her nails done, or doing Pilates. So, I don't understand why she resents me or sees me as a competition when this is the life she has always wanted. Secondly, Sil's husband was not present at the dinner party that night. He usually never attends any of our family events, as he is too busy working. Also, the few times I have met him, he is very level-headed, so I am sure if he were present, Sil would have never even slapped me in the first place. He would never have allowed her to throw a tantrum like that, as he is very careful about his image around other people. Lastly, after reading hundreds of comments under my post, I can't help but agree with everyone. My husband has always been a gaslighter. For years, I wore rose-colored glasses, choosing to overlook the patterns that, in hindsight, have always been there. The truth is, he has consistently supported his family over me, and I've allowed myself to believe it was just the way things were supposed to be. Take Christmas and New Year's, for example. We've always celebrated those holidays with his family, year after year. Despite my repeated requests to take turns and spend those important holidays with my side of the family also, he has always gaslit me, saying that his family comes first. Every time I brought it up, he insists that as a good daughter-in-law, I should compromise and prioritize his family before mine. It always feels like my needs, my family, my traditions don't matter as much as his. And in those moments, I've always been made to feel guilty for wanting something different. Also, I blame myself for how things have turned out. I realize now that I have allowed my husband to dictate my life for a long time. His disregard for my feelings, paired with his subtle manipulation, has always kept me in a place of doubt. I've always second-guessed myself, wondering if maybe I was being too demanding or unreasonable, but I am glad that I came to Reddit with my story and everyone here has finally opened my eyes to the truth. Lastly, the reason my mother is kind of siding with my husband is because she believes I shouldn't let such a petty issue like my sister-in-law being rude or toxic interfere in our marriage. She clearly doesn't understand how deep this issue runs and how much it has affected me. She doesn't see how my husband's behavior has worn me down over time. However, she does acknowledge that my sister-in-law slapping me was completely wrong. Ray and I finally had a sit-down, in a neutral location away from home, just so we could talk everything out plainly. It's been almost 2 weeks since my last update, and I decided that I finally need to address things with him. When we met up, Ray started by apologizing. It took me by surprise because, honestly, I hadn't expected him to apologize at all. He told me how happy he was that I had paid his sister back the money for her dress. This is exactly what I had been waiting for, a genuine acknowledgement of the situation. But of course, after apologizing to me, Ray immediately followed up by saying that now it was my turn to apologize to his family. He explained that I still owed his sister a proper apology for humiliating her in front of everyone. He told me how his mother and sister had essentially threatened to shun him from the family unless he made me apologize to her. I looked at him, stunned. I asked him, "What about when she slapped me first? Is she going to apologize to me for that?" He then tried to justify her behavior by saying that his sister was a bit tipsy and that seeing me spill red wine all over her had made her aggressive. He argued that anyone in his sister's position would have reacted the same way and that I should have just kept quiet and accepted her reaction. At that moment, I had to pause and take a deep breath. I didn't know if I was more hurt or angry at how little he seemed to understand what I had gone through. I then told him that while I was sorry that I had slapped his sister back, I wasn't sorry for standing up for myself. I wished he had supported me in front of his family, but he didn't, so I had no choice but to defend myself. I continued to tell him how for years, I'd always tried to accommodate him and his family, and kept myself small in front of them. I did it because I thought that's what being in love meant: compromising, adjusting, and supporting one another, even if it meant sacrificing my own feelings at times. But his repeated failure to stand up for me and his willingness to let his sister treat me like trash had made me realize something very important: that I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect me. I then listed out every instance where he and his family had misbehaved towards me over the years and how each of those moments had made me feel. I told him that as my husband, if he couldn't even be bold enough to stand up to his bratty sister, then I didn't see the point of continuing our relationship. Ray argued that he loved his family and didn't like confronting them, especially his precious sister. He pointed out that I was his wife, so he felt he could make me understand why it was important for him to keep the peace. That comment made my blood boil. I told him that being his wife didn't mean I was obligated to put up with disrespect or mistreatment. Every time he stayed silent, it felt like he was choosing his family over me, and I was tired of being second place in my own marriage. As if this wasn't already enough, Ray also informed me how his mother had basically uninvited me from all future family events at their house as she didn't want me around them anymore. When I was taken aback, Ray argued how this was going to be okay because I didn't like his family anyway. He told me that from now on, for Christmas or New Year's, I was free to spend time with my own family, just like I'd always wanted, while he would be with his. I scoffed at how selfish he sounded. The audacity he had to dismiss my feelings and tried to gaslight me once again. At that moment, I told him that I had been thinking about a decision for a few days, but after talking to him, everything had become crystal clear. I wanted to divorce him as I was done with this marriage. Ray's face immediately fell, and he looked like he couldn't believe what I had just said. He argued that I was being too emotional, and told me that I was taking things too far over something so trivial. Okay, fine, you don't have to bring up divorce. If you don't want to apologize to my sister, I'll talk to her and convince her to let it go this time since you seem so stuck on this. But next time, don't ever slap my sister again. I stood my ground and told him that I didn't care about any of that anymore. Ray, I am done. My lawyer will be contacting you soon. You're free now to spend the rest of your life catering to your mother and sister, just like you've always wanted, I said. Ray tried to argue further, but I just stood up and left him standing there. I couldn't be in a relationship where I wasn't valued, where my feelings didn't matter, and where his family always came before our marriage. Since then, Ray has been sending me voice notes pleading with me not to go through with a divorce. He keeps telling me how I'm destroying our marriage and how he can't imagine living the rest of his life without me. I have muted his messages for now and will continue to ignore him in the future. My mother-in-law has been relentlessly texting me ever since I met with my husband a few days ago and asked for a divorce. She claims that I have no right to just leave her son, and according to her, I am making him unnecessarily suffer just out of spite. She strongly believes that I should make things right by moving back in with my husband even if I am unhappy in the marriage, and apologize to Sil right away. Margaret, I have met with a lawyer already, so this divorce is happening whether you like it or not. Just a warning, I'm more than capable of exposing you and your spoiled daughter on social media now that I don't care about your family anymore. You and your daughter have done nothing but bully me throughout this entire marriage, and I have screenshots to prove that, so don't test me. Your son is going to be alone now because of you. I hope next time he brings a woman home, you'll think twice before treating her like trash. Since sending this, Mill has read my message but hasn't had the guts to reply back. I guess she's finally realized I'm not messing around anymore. Sil has been blocked so she can't even reach me. Well folks, that will be all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Stay safe everyone.